welcome again to our MCC members on this exclusive discussion with our Lord Mayor Sally Capp, coming to you from the Victoria Pavilion at the Melbourne Showgrounds. Of course, thanks to our sponsors today, the Royal Agricultural Society of Victoria and Encore Technologies. And Sarah will have a bit more to say about that a bit later on. We're hoping many of you will have watched the Victorian Chamber webinar just prior to this. So we won't go over the introduction as the Lord Mayor did previously, but we do want to take some time to go through some more specific questions which are more relevant to your industries and businesses. And I can guarantee the Lord Mayor will be as insightful as she was in the earlier session as well. We'll just have a bit more time to go through that. So with that, our Melbourne Chamber of Commerce relationship consultants have been canvassing you, and we've got those questions, and I'm going to hand it over now to our Chief Executive of the Melbourne Chamber, Diane Smith, to start with some of those to the Lord Mayor. Over to you, Diane.
Thank you very much, Paul. And thank you, Sally. You're now with friends, I can assure you. And we really appreciate this opportunity to have a bit of a deeper delve into the questions from the Melbourne Chamber of Commerce, with whom you're quite familiar with many of these members.
Of course.
So I'll get straight into it. So, Lord Mayor, how do you see the City of Melbourne working with tourism bodies such as Visit Victoria and the Melbourne Convention Bureau in really bringing back that visitation to the city?
It's such a good question, and as I said earlier, we've been delighted that the levels of collaboration and cooperation have only increased during this time. At times of stress, it's often, the first response is to become selfish and inward looking. And it's just been fantastic to see how embracing people have been, and we need that. I think, for one, we need it because it's always been a hallmark of Melbourne that's really differentiated us as a destination, is that sense of cooperation, not just in tourism, but right across our economy. But in the tourism sector, we really do need to work together, and here's a bit of a challenge that, as we see it. We are going to have to rely on a smaller market for some time, because we're not going to see big numbers of international tourists coming to visit Melbourne. We're working closely with Visit Victoria and other bodies to come up with ideas, and the principle of that is, or at its core, is what can we do that is new? What can we do to help people rediscover perhaps things that had started to become underappreciated or undervisited? What can we do to repackage ourselves? And we know that Melbourne has a role to play, not just in our own tourism, but in being that gateway or that centre pivot point, if you like, for tourism right across our state, and we are completely open to that. In fact, with our partnership with the East Gippsland Shire, we're currently marketing attractions in East Gippsland as a way of sharing and also of supporting that region, particularly after the bushfires, but now COVID. So it's a sense of maintaining us working together, but also what can be new. We talk about that sense of delighting people. I think in what's going to be ultra competitive for the Australian market, and hopefully also New Zealand, what are the things, where do we step up to create a sense of new? We're known as major events, and having mass gatherings come back in the hundreds of thousands, we're not expecting to see that this year, hopefully tens of thousands. But on that gradual path towards us fully blooming, if you like, in tourism, what are the things that we can do to surprise and delight?
And it's interesting because New Zealand and Australia are quite different. So there's still so much scope, isn't there, to explore the destinations further. Just moving to the broader economy, Sally, at our leadership lunch back in November, completely different circumstances, you were reporting on the incredible growth of the economy, $100 billion per annum economic impact and 25% of the gross state product. At that lunch, Brendan Britton, the managing partner of Pitcher Partners, was our host, and he asks a question, what do you see in terms of the size of the economy post-COVID?
It's a really tough one, and of course, some days it's hard to believe that it was really only sort of 10 to 12 weeks ago that our lives were turned upside down. because we've been so deep in this and it's all consuming. Again, a shout out to our team. Really, the streets have seemed quiet, but we know from our experience that behind the doors, the activity has been frenetic, not just delivering essential services, but really starting to think about what have the impacts been and how do we, together with others, start building up our economy again. It's also difficult because a lot of people are working from home, so there are elements of our economy that continue, and we're trying to get some clearer data on what that's meant in terms of the gross local product in the City of Melbourne. But there are some pretty clear indicators that our Melbourne economy, we think, will be disproportionately impacted. And it goes to what have been the strengths, and we hope that they will remain strengths of our city. Firstly, the focus on higher education. In just our municipality, higher education represents about 60% of our gross local product. It's not just the universities, it's everybody involved in higher ed, and of course it's all of the ancillary services and products that come from the sector. But we know that international students has been something that's been a centrepiece. There are many of them that are here, there are many of them that are waiting to come back. And as we said earlier, we think there's a wonderful marketing opportunity for us into competing against markets that had started to become more predominant, the US, UK. It's not just the health issues, it's so many other issues that they're experiencing. And luckily for us here, not to the same extent. So being able to market to new people. Within our higher ed, we know that the universities and other institutions are grappling with how do they bring students back on campus. Yes. All of those details are being worked through at the moment, and we're certainly supporting in every way that we can. But the requirements around cleaning alone are enormous. It's the logistics of it, it's also the cost of it. But we know we have to provide a safe environment. So it'll be that mixture of on-campus and online. And how do we make that work well? But if we go to professional services, we go to major events and tourism, we look at those components of our economy. When we were preparing for our recovery budget, as we call it, the 21 budget, we realised starkly, I think we've really taken for granted that the city economy is built on people gathering and meeting and coming together at scale.
Yes.
And we're good at it, and we should remain good at it. But how we get back to those levels is a challenge.
And just on mass gatherings, so clearly it's going to change for the foreseeable future. What would you say large corporations can do to assist in rebuilding the prosperity of the city? If you were going to ask them and you had a room full of large corporates, what would you suggest they could be doing? That was a question from Sophia Healy from Spotless.
Oh, great. Well, Sophia, thank you to you and your team, because when we mention collaborations, the Cleaning Our City initiative, which has now been picked up by municipalities across Melbourne, was a collaboration with Spotless, a brilliant idea that has flourished because it's so good. And that confidence around the cleanliness of the city is one of those key elements. We've increased our budget around city cleaning, as you can imagine. I'll go back to the discussion we were having earlier, and I think that's really about identifying all of the components that are essential for employers to be able to say to their employees, come back. And as we started that conversation, it is about the state government easing restrictions, but to do that, we also need to know that the logistical elements are in place. From talking to different people, I believe workers do want to come back, but if it's end of trip facilities, if you come in by jogging or cycling, if it's how do people get up and down in the lifts, and we saw that dealt with very quickly. When it was put to the Prime Minister, he immediately eased some of the restrictions around that, but it's not until we know that they are the issues that other levels of government or organisations can respond. It's about our bike lanes, which is terrific, but only if they've got good connections from other parts of Melbourne. It's about looking at the congestion issues. I know in Sydney, they've looked at opening up their parks for extra parking, free parking. We are looking at all sorts of elements together with the private car parks on how we can accommodate people that feel that that is their only option. And of course, the public transport operators are doing everything they can to be able to welcome people back on, the police. There are just so many elements to it, and I think let's not be overwhelmed by the complexity. Let's actually keep raising what those challenges are so we can deal with them. But our prosperity in the City of Melbourne is absolutely tied to welcoming workers back into our city. We can't understate the importance of that. When all of your workers come back, then other people come from other states to meet, or they come from regional to meet with them, or we have our international meeting visitors start to come back in. There's a very delicate ecosystem here. And that balance, really at the centre of it, is around workers returning to our city.
Yeah. And it's fantastic to be so positive and to talk about the positive things that people can be doing. But with the safety measures in place, it might just be that we are more congested. And do you foresee threats to our famed livability as a result of that?
It's a good question, and it's paramount to how we work with the state government and departments to manage the juggle. I think this is a time where we have to accept that we're going to have to try some things and expect them that they'll fail. Nobody likes to do that. And frankly, Australia's not being very good with their risk profile in those ways because we can be so unforgiving. But frankly, we're going to have to try. We are collecting data, not just from other cities in Australia, but from around the world to look at the experiences they're having. Of course, every culture is different, so we have to be mindful of that. But if we can learn from other people's mistakes, super. If we can learn from the things that they're doing well, terrific. But we are going to have to start trying some things, and if they don't work, make another decision, be agile. We've shown that we can do it. We've shown mass behaviour change and that we can manage that well. So let's be confident about the fact of stepping into these challenges and responding quickly, whether they fail or they work well. I think part of the opportunity of a crisis is actually about how we leverage those types of things, and we've shown that we can be cautious and careful. That's how we've managed the health response. We can still do that but take risks, and so it's a matter of doing that together.
And it's tricky, just the lack of certainty. We've got to do it one step at a time. That was a question from Nico Opacek from First State Super. I should have acknowledged that. Lord Mayor, the City of Melbourne has some fantastic projects and fantastic initiatives of which you're driving yourselves, but also that you play a support role. Now, you mentioned earlier the importance of perhaps accelerating infrastructure projects. Can you talk to us about just your role in some of those bigger projects, such as, say, the Metro Tunnel project? What do you foresee in terms of them proceeding with a minimum of disruption, given the situation with COVID-19? And this is a question from Louise Adams, who heads up Oricon.
Great. Well done, Louise. Look, I come into these forums and I'm a naturally positive person, so I'm an optimist, and optimists tend to see opportunities in challenges, but please don't be deceived. The heartbreak, the desperation, the confusion that's out there is something that we deal with every day. And we need to do some positivity to build up confidence. But the other side of it is recognising that, you know, we've hit rock bottom in so many aspects of our economy, and we do need to roll our sleeves up, and we do need to work together, and there's a long road of hard work ahead. I don't underestimate that. I feel buoyed by the fact of knowing that we work together well in partnership and that we've got organisations around town that have the same approach. And this is what's led actually to some of the, I guess, the glimmers of optimism around the city is that, yes, there are some sectors that have been deemed essential services, not just our rubbish collections, but things like our building sites and construction sites, our medical precinct and hospitals. And so we have seen ongoing activity there. There's been obviously new levels of cooperation. We've extended the permits for working hours. We are doing that on a case-by-case basis because most of our residents are actually home and working from home at this time, so we have to balance their productivity. But recognising that while the streets are quiet, it is a good time to get things done. And so we have seen that level of cooperation. I actually spent, my first meeting was early morning with some residents walking the streets of Melbourne, hearing their gripes and groans about the noise and the activity, but a good appreciation from them as well that now is the time to accelerate some of these works. And that's very true. Where it's appropriate and possible with the Melbourne Metro sites, the next big phase of that is actually right outside my window at Town Hall with that station there underneath City Square, and truck movements, as we know, Flinders Street eastbound has been closed, westbound just closed on Monday. Let's get that right, because we will see an escalation of that activity. And as I said, where it's appropriate, let's keep doing it, because it is the workers on those sites that stay employed. It is all of the people that work behind the scenes on those big projects, designers and surveyors and architects that are still engaged and employed in relation to those projects. But I can tell you, when I go and visit the traders at Queen Victoria Market, they are absolutely delighted that the work on the Melbourne Metro continues there. At Franklin Street, that the Munro site is under construction, because they are buying food and they are buying coffees and they are taking fresh food home with them. And we see how, the economy works in those little ecosystems to actually support each other. And so for every way in which we can maintain those essential services, knowing that it is helping other parts of our economy, we can see it right there.
And congratulations on the decision this week with the Queen Victoria Market. So it's fantastic that you're moving ahead with the square there. That's really great news. So if I was living or running a business down in Fisherman's Bend or in Arden Street, some of those exciting future precinct developments, will there be any changes with the rate of change with those projects and their develement? That was actually from Tom Gallagher from Boeing, so he has an interest in that.
Go Tom! Look, there have been a lot of natural pauses as a result of COVID, but our passion for our key precincts in the city hasn't abated. Many of those meetings and discussions have continued. What we're very conscious of is the capacity of different sectors, the university sector, the private sector, to invest in the ways they might have been planning to. That has changed. It doesn't mean necessarily it's not going to continue, but we do have to, some of the discussions have actually been focused on where is that capacity at, what can we do to help with that capacity, what are some of the ways we can overcome some of the barriers. The planning around Arden has continued in full force, and of course that's an area that has very good public transport links, and so the planning, our team at City of Melbourne has remained very busy on that. Our Fisherman's Bend, I don't mind calling it out, the central issue has been and remains, how can we get certainty and confidence around a public transport link into that precinct. We know that public transport's absolutely essential for underpinning public and private investment, particularly in the employment precinct where Tom is. And I can assure you that the type of discussion and the passion, let me put it that way, the passion for that topic and the cadence of our discussions continue. And the state government is certainly very well aware of that remaining a primary issue. In the meantime, all of the planning, all of the work with the City of Port Phillip to coordinate across the 2 precincts, the work of the Fisherman's Bend Task Force and Board, all of that has been ongoing. So Tom, I hope you've been able to retain a lot of your ongoing discussions about investment in that area as we have. And of course, when we talked earlier about the need for this city, not just to get back to a new normal, but to really position ourselves around a new extraordinary in what will be an ultra competitive environment as economies around the world struggle to thrive again, we need to make sure that we've positioned ourselves in the best way that we can, and precincts like Fisherman's Bend and Arden remain central to that. We're not backing away from any of those discussions at all.
How fitting is it that the theme for Reconciliation Week is In This Together?
Yeah.
And you mentioned that earlier. A lot of our members are very interested in how they can play their role, in particular with the social recovery needed and how the community is going to recover. So Karen Dobson from Dow Chemical specifically asked, how else can we work together in a pro-business manner to really support our communities? There's a real interest in that.
Yeah, thank you. And making sure that we keep that caring nature of Melbourne at the forefront has been incredibly important for us. It's been a guide for us in our decision making as we look at limited resources but increased need. And so, Karen, thanks for that question. And there will be ways, because I believe that even though this economic impact is devastating, we all decided as a population and as a community that the health response was number one. So we've seen how we have prioritised a healthy outcome over economic. I'm not saying I acknowledge the devastation, but I think keeping that as part of our culture is really important and will lead to what we hope will be an acceleration of some of the ambitions of the city that have both good social dividends but also good productivity and economic dividends. And if I go to some of the discussions we've been having with Karen, with Dow Chemical so involved around plastic, which has in many ways become a dirty word. I hate to say it, but plastic bags banned everywhere and people focused on plastic as we should be. I know that the innovation that organisations like Dow work on, and the first one, which I didn't even think about when I came into this role, but which is so important, is how do we reduce packaging in the first place? So we're still using plastics, but we actually use them in smart ways to reduce. Makes a huge difference to every part of our city, from the rubbish that collects on our streets and in our bins, reducing the number of times we have to collect, but importantly, reducing what goes to landfill has a major social dividend and is a major reform outcome in our city. And we must use this time to, I keep using the word accelerate those ambitions, because if we don't, we're not going to position ourselves the best that we can. So definitely the caring part, it is about caring for people. I haven't talked about homelessness. It's my number one topic. Where we've got to with homelessness and rough sleeping in the city, with the cooperation and leadership of state government, all the agencies, we've never seen it before. We've got more than 1,000 people now in accommodation with support services and fed every day. We're down to virtually no rough sleepers in our city, which is incredible. It's that sort of prioritisation of our values, and that caring applies to a lot of other factors where we need reform, and recycling waste and rubbish is certainly another part of the focus.
Sally, I have just one very quick question to finish on.
I should give you a quick answer, which I don't tend to do. I am sorry.
Just quickly, do you see the demographics changing in terms of the city, and what are the implications of those changes for councils across the state? it's going to be different, isn't it? And that's
Well, it
probably
is.
too big a question to ask for
Well,
last
no,
one.
I'm smiling because apparently we're going to be having lots of babies as a result of COVID. It's anecdotal only. I don't have any hard
Not
data
you and
on
I,
that.
but anyway.
Not me, that's for sure. I'm not making any announcements today. I meant the royal we babies. So the demographics will change. We absolutely know that diversity was one of our ambitions in the city, and we know that that represents successful communities. The interesting dynamic around things like rents and property and that changing so that rents become lower does give us an opportunity to introduce more of that diversity into our city, both from a residential and a commercial perspective. I'm not wishing that on any of our landlords. I'm just saying if we do see an adjustment, we can't be deterred by it. We need to look for those parts of our community that might otherwise have been locked out of residential because it became too expensive, or locked out of commercial, and say, here is an opportunity to welcome those people and organisations into our communities, and let's make the most of that opportunity.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you so much. That was from Dana Nelson from BGIS. And it's now my pleasure, Lord Mayor, to introduce Sarah Clarence, who's from the Melbourne Showgrounds, and she's going to say a few words on behalf of this amazing facility we're in here.
Thanks, Diane. Thanks to everyone for listening.
Thank you so much, Diane and Lord Mayor. It has been a pleasure, so many positive stories, and I'm really looking forward to the next few months. Many thanks to you all for joining us for today's webinar. Now, although you can't be here in person, we are delighted that you are able to join us in our brand new Encore studio within the Victoria Pavilion here at the Melbourne Showgrounds. You may have just seen in the break, we had a little highlights reel of some of the recent events that we've had at Victoria Pavilion, and you can see a little more on our website. For those that don't know, Victoria Pavilion is the newest large-scale premium space in Melbourne. This incredible venue in a banquet capacity can seat up to 1,200 normally, which means we can easily aim to accommodate social distancing guidelines for your events as the restrictions ease. Now, like me, we bet you've been participating in multiple Zoom or virtual meetings recently. It's been a fantastic way to keep us all connected, but it can be a little hard to stay excited when talking to a computer daily. I know you may have experienced that like me, but it's great to stay connected that way. But if you're looking at some other new ways to reach and engage your audience, that's where the Encore Virtual Studio in Victoria Pavilion can help. With our on-site technology partner Encore, we've created this purpose-built virtual studio where content can be presented with the guidance of our experienced audiovisual team and deliver broadcast quality viewing for your presentations, online training, webinars and more. It's been great to see you ladies here today, and Paul, you're enjoying it so far. I think it's going fantastically.
It's been fabulous, absolutely.
It's completely comfortable, and we're so impressed, Sarah. So
Very professional.
thank you very much.
Fantastic to hear. Look, it really has been amazing to see so many industries successfully pivot their business to a new model in this new world. So we would love to be a part of helping you make that change.
Thank you, Sarah. And also, thank you very much to the Royal Agricultural Society of Victoria and the Lord Mayor. It's now my pleasure to introduce Karen Sobels, the President of the Victorian Chamber, to provide a vote of thanks.
Thanks very much, Diane. And once again, I've already said thank you to Sally on everyone's behalf on our earlier broadcast. But for everybody who's on the call, and we do miss being in the same room with you. We do look forward to being in a room where we can actually fit 1,200 people again in a safe way, which will just be terrific. I wanted to thank all of you, but also to reach out to you and say, if you do have ideas or questions or can be part of the creative future for the City of Melbourne, please reach out to Sally. She'll always be happy to take your call, or to Diane, because I know that a lot of you already on the call have already done that and worked together to be part of the future of this great city. So thank you for continuing to be part of this great Melbourne Chamber of Commerce community who really steps up in these times to help and drive things forward. So thank you, Sally, once again. Thank you to the Royal Agricultural Society for this amazing venue, and for those of you who haven't been here when there's no crowds, very spooky but amazing. And we really look forward to having all of us in the same room again soon. Thanks and goodbye.